We've explored two common eviction scenarios, but we haven't explored the biggie yet.
Renovictions across Ontario. That's when a landlord forces out a tenant to fix up an apartment and then hikes the rent.
One of the most popular reasons a landlord can evict you is because they want to renovate or rebuild a unit or building. In this case, you might receive a form called N13. Another term you might hear in reference to N13s is demovictions. This is when a landlord evicts a tenant claiming they want to demolish a rental unit.
My name is Miso. I'm just your average, everyday sort of office worker living in Toronto. I was born and I've always lived in Toronto. A year ago now, I found out that my building and actually my parents' and sister's building, since we're all neighbors, all of those buildings are set for demolition because they are proposing a new condo tower be built. I haven't been evicted yet because our application is going through the tribunal process.
Choi is from the Hillsdale Manor Tenants Association, which received a letter from their developer letting them know that they are submitting an application to demolish the unit. While technically they haven't received their N13s yet, Choi and her neighbors are trying to fight this process before it begins. If you've been following this series, you know I like to make the occasional joke, but the reality is evictions are quite a scary and overwhelming process.
Yeah, it was absolutely terrifying. And I think in those situations, you can have there's a couple of ways you can respond to it. I'm a super anxious person. So for me, my response was like, okay, what can we do now? I need to find out more information. I need to get organized and notify the city and do all that sort of stuff. My parents, who are also in a building set for demoviction, they're my neighbors. They kind of shut down, and they're elderly. They're in their 70s, and they've lived in their apartment for 40 years. And I think just the thought of having to move for them, and just the realities of how hard it is to rent in the city, it was terrifying. And for all of us, for my entire family, we consider where we live our home. It's very emotional and it's upsetting, and it's really destabilizing.
Specifically for N13s, landlords can only evict renters if 1. It requires a building permit, and 2. It requires the building to be empty. In this scenario, the landlord must at least give you 120 days notice through the N13 form. They must submit the L2 application no later than 30 days after the termination date on the N13, and they must provide compensation. This means they have to offer you between 1 to 3 months worth of rent or another rental unit that is acceptable to you. They also have to offer you the right to refusal. Megan Key is an organizer for No Demovictions. No Demovictions is a collection of tenants associations across Ontario. Key highlights the importance of tenant associations in fighting evictions like these.
Having a tenant association in a building that isn't facing something like renovictions, demovictions, or even AGIs is fundamentally important because it gives you the collective organizing power of not only knowing your neighbors, which is something that I've really come to enjoy through this process, but also understanding the tactics of the building and the landlord and the way that they use those against tenants. And when you're separate, you don't know your neighbors, it's very difficult to advocate collectively, but collectively, you have power, much more power than you do as an individual. And it ensures that if one tenant is being treated unfairly, or if there are inequities in the way that tenants are being treated, that it could be looked at as a whole. If you come together as a building to fight against these, you have a much greater chance of getting what you want if you're working together than if you're working as an individual.
Tenant associations can help people access the resources and support that is needed to protect their rights. The Green Lines tool on how to fight above guideline rent increases actually suggests connecting with your community as the first step of the process.
One of the things that I think all tenants should know is that unless you are served an official notice, an N12 or an N13, you do not have to leave your apartment. Just because your landlord or your property manager says that you are being evicted and you have to leave on a certain day, they have to do it through the landlord tenant board. They cannot just arbitrarily kick you out because they want you out. And so it's important for tenants to know that they need to see all of the appropriate paperwork if they are going to be evicted to go through due process. And landlords know that they need to do this, but they also know that a lot of tenants do not know their rights and they will just leave.
When I began the series, I started it on the premise that I knew very little about my tenant rights. That uncertainty scared me. But after reading and talking to a few experts, it's helpful to know what resources are available if I were in this situation. I hope through sharing my learning process with you, you were able to learn about a process or a tool or a resource that you didn't already know before. As usual, I'm going to link all the resources I've been reading in a little document in the bio called the Totally Non-Extensive Guide to Evictions. Thanks for tagging along.